David Drucker joins us. Great group this hour as we start the second hour of Morning Joe. And we want to dive right into the numbers with this election. Donald Trump's victory was astonishing in its scope. He increased his vote share across the U.S., claiming the battleground states of North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and bolstering his support among almost all social groups. Trump increased his vote share in every state, apart from Utah and Washington. He also garnered the support of a remarkable 1 in 3 voters of color, most likely the best performance of any Republican presidential candidate since George W. Bush in his 2004 re-election effort. Trump picked up a small but significant share of younger voters, black voters, and Hispanic voters, many of whom were feeling down about the economy. Among voters under 30, slightly less than half went for Trump, an improvement from his 2020 performance. And this year, Latino men broke in his direction for the first time. Biden won their support by 23 points back in 2020. Trump won them in 2024. Joe, a lot to unpack here.
So much to unpack right here. And again, numbers that Democrats need to be looking at are like the percentage, 32%. Only 32% of Americans identified themselves as Democrats. I can't remember a number that low in my lifetime. It really is a party disconnected from large swaths of working class Americans, middle class Americans. But I want to go back first. Let's go back to Kamala Harris's speech, because we're doing the postmortem right now, and we should do that. We need to figure out exactly what's happening out in the country, why Donald Trump won the way he did, why he picked up in 48 out of 50 states, why he has cobbled together this working class coalition across racial lines and racial barriers we haven't seen a coalition like this in quite some time. I do, though, let's first talk about Kamala Harris's speech. I thought like once again she hit all the marks. I thought it was a strong speech. Obviously you see politicians, candidates that give these speeches in what have to be the most difficult of times, and she gave the speech.
Yes,
she conceded. Unlike Donald Trump 4 years ago, she gave the speech and she conceded. That is what American patriots do. It's what American patriots have been doing for over 200 years now. And God bless Kamala Harris for doing that. God bless the Democrats who supported her for not storming capitals, for not talking about how the election was rigged, for not sending out disinformation. God bless them. That is the example that we have to set as a nation for all of the world. It didn't happen 4 years ago for the first time since the Civil War. It happened this year. So God bless Kamala Harris and the party. That is so important. Go ahead.
If I could add, she will. We do need to talk about how abortion laws were voted for and against in different states, and the fight for abortion rights, for health care rights, will continue. She made it very clear the fight on many levels would continue. The fight for democracy would continue. The fight for freedom would continue. It was a very strong speech. It wasn't sort of a goodbye. I didn't see that at all. And it reminded me a lot of what she said to me on stage in San Francisco at a Know Your Value event that she was the keynote for, where she talked about being a first. And she was talking about running for president back then. And she predicted exactly what this experience would be. Now, she's already a first in being the first woman of color to serve as vice president of the United States. But then again, running for president again, she talked back then about how ugly it would get, about how painful it would be. And this is part of it. Losing is painful, especially when it seems like our lives are on the line. It is painful. And she spoke of that to me back in 2018 so authentically in terms of understanding what the consequences and what the realities are of being a first, of being a groundbreaker. It hurts.
Right.
And she's not going anywhere, Joe.
Well, and again, it's so important that you have politicians that pour their heart and their soul into the campaign, be they Republicans or Democrats, and lose that campaign. And it's got to be so difficult for them. Mike Barnicle, when she talked about the fight going on, it reminded me of Ted Kennedy's famous momentous speech in 1980 that we Red Sox fans have painted on our hearts, printed on our hearts every fall. And of course, it's where Kennedy said for me a few hours ago, this campaign came to an end. For all of those who care, have been our concern. The work goes on. The cause endures.
The dream will
The
never
hope
die.
still lives. And the dream will never die. For people at home right now thinking that the end of history was 2 nights ago, it's not, because the battle goes on, be you a Republican, an independent, or a Democrat. And that's what democracy has been for 240 years. And that's the note that Kamala Harris sounded, that the fight goes on and the hope still lives. And the dream shall never die.
You know, Joe, in an odd way, Kamala Harris yesterday stood up, and she was a symbol of democracy in what she said and how she said it. She conceded, as Mika just pointed out. And the irony is that on January 20th, the incoming president-elect of the United States, Donald J. Trump, will at some point be asked to put his hand on a Bible. Hope it's not a Trump Bible made in China. Put his hand on a Bible and swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States, something that he had no respect for in January of 2021. And it's going to be an odd picture watching that. But, you know, on the other aspect of Kamala Harris's concession speech yesterday, in looking at the box scores of what happened in America on Tuesday, you can't help but thinking that the Democrats are in the same position, we were speaking about this yesterday, as the Republicans were way back in 1964. Their party was crushed, destroyed by Lyndon Johnson, winning 49 states, I believe, in 1964. And that's where the Democrats are now. And the basis of the Democratic Party, the roots of the Democratic Party, established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, union workers, iron workers, steel workers, machinists, they are now part of a party, and they're in that party, the Republican Party, because they're walking around, a lot of them, having viewed the culture of the past several years as an enemy. And they're walking around, prior to voting for Donald Trump in record numbers, asking themselves, who is stealing our country from us? The Democrats have to answer that question.
They really do. Willie, I want to read you. Mike had just talked about the 64 election. The Republicans completely wiped out. And again, just to let Americans know on both sides, and this was just as true as when Barack Obama won in 2008, and it looked like the Democrats were wiped out when Barry Goldwater won or got destroyed in 64, and Republicans thought they were wiped out. This is from Before the Storm, a great book by Rick Perlstein about the rise of the Reagan coalition, and talked about how bad 64 was. The matter stood, the American right had been rendered a political footnote, perhaps for good. The morning after, the wise men weighed in. Reston of the Times. He has wrecked his party for a long time to come, Reston wrote of Goldwater, and it is not even likely to control the wreckage. The New Yorker. This election has finished the Goldwater school of political reaction. By every test we have, declared James McGregor Burns, one of the nation's most esteemed scholars of the presidency, this is surely a liberal epic, as the late 19th century was a conservative one. And they just go on, and he starts the book by talking about how the Republican Party is destroyed for a generation. And then, of course, he takes you to Ronald Reagan in a strip mall parking lot in Orange County and something is happening on the ground. That happens for every party. There is always renewal, but as we said last hour, perhaps the Democratic Party should go to France for a couple of weeks, figure out what went wrong. Because when you're a political party and only 32% of Americans identify with you, that ain't the presidential candidate. That ain't the city councilman. That's a bigger structural problem with the Democratic Party and what it stands for with working class Americans of all colors.
And maybe after they spend a little time in France, go to some of those counties and those towns that they're so shocked that they were hemorrhaged on Tuesday night. That might be a better visit for all of them. I'm also thinking, Joe, as you tell that story about Karl Rove after George Bush won, talking about the permanent Republican majority. This is going to go on forever. After Barack Obama won, it's a new era of Democratic politics. You then go to the shellacking, as President Obama called it, in the midterm elections. These things, as you've been saying for the last 24 hours, have an ebb and a flow. Turnout was a problem. Lemire was talking in our last segment about 68 million votes for Kamala Harris in this election, where Joe Biden got 81 million votes 4 years ago. So turnout in Democratic strongholds was a problem. According to the New York Times, Mrs. Harris's defeat is not entirely explained by the voters' embrace of Mr. Trump. After months of flagging voter enthusiasm, there were signs many Democrats simply failed to show up in key party strongholds. In Wayne County, Michigan, which includes Detroit, unofficial results showed Ms. Harris had won 6% fewer votes than President Biden had won 4 years ago. And turnout declined about 6 percentage points in Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, according to unofficial results. Ms. Harris's vote total slipped while Mr. Trump's increased. But the common thread among those who did gravitate toward Mr. Trump appeared to be a working class identity regardless of neighborhood. And Jeremy Peters, that is the thread. Through race, through identity, through everything else, prices were too high. They didn't believe that Kamala Harris, who was attached to Joe Biden, was going to help them improve their lives, and they're willing to take a shot that Donald Trump will.
Right, Willie. Presidential elections, as we all know, are often referenda on the incumbent. And in this case, even though she wasn't the president, she was seen as an extension of the Biden administration. And voters overwhelmingly felt they would be giving Biden a second term by electing her. I think you hit it on the head there with that line from our story about the way that people, the results of this election can't be explained solely by Trump and an affinity that voters have for him, because that's not true. If you look at the exit polls, something like 40% of the people who said they were voting against her. If you look at in the ways people, when they were asked, is your vote primarily for your candidate or against the other guy? And 40% said they were voting against her. So that tells you, to Joe's point, that something has broken down with the contract that voters in these urban areas, and it wasn't just urban areas, it was rural, it was suburban, that they feel like they don't have that anymore with the Democratic Party, that the Democratic Party isn't offering them the ticket to a more comfortable life, a better life, one where they can afford a house, where their rent isn't soaring, where groceries aren't so high, one where they feel like the country is headed in the right direction and their politicians are looking out for their values. I think you can't have this conversation about 2024 without first having a conversation about what happened in 2020 in the Democratic primaries and how far away